Imagine living in a society where eating ice cream on a Sunday was considered a crime, or where the police could arrest you simply because you were not wearing a hat. Unbelievable, isn't it? Yet this was the reality in early America, where strange laws existed that today make us laugh and wonder how people managed to live under such restrictions. In those early days, religion and traditional values had a deep influence on lawmaking, which is why many bizarre rules were imposed on social life. For example, in the 1800s, certain states enforced the so-called blue laws, under which every form of entertainment on Sundays was forbidden, no games were allowed, no music could be played, and even going out to eat ice cream in the market was prohibited. Police officers would patrol the streets and fine people who were seen eating ice cream or engaging in leisure activities. People were told that Sunday was meant solely for church and worship, and anyone who violated this was considered immoral or negligent of religion. Now, if in today's world a major city announced that all shopping malls and ice cream parlors must close on Sundays, people would surely protest. But back then this law was enforced so strictly that many people ate ice cream secretly, and in some places it was even regarded as a sin. Another strange law that seems almost unbelievable today was the so-called rule of thumb, which permitted a husband to beat his wife with a stick provided that the stick was no thicker than his thumb. Women were viewed as property of men, and domestic violence was not considered a crime but rather a husband's right. Only if the woman was severely injured or her life was in danger would the courts intervene, otherwise such behavior was treated as normal. Reading about this law today is chilling and makes us question how a civilized society could allow such inhumane treatment to be legal, but at that time people accepted it as a reality of life. Later on, women raised their voices against this injustice, movements were launched, and after decades such laws were abolished. Yet these stories reveal how early American society was bound by religion, traditions, and a patriarchal mindset, forcing people to live under restrictions that now seem absurd and even shocking to us. In the strange world of old American laws, even the way people dressed or presented themselves in public could determine whether they were seen as law-abiding or criminals. For instance, there was a time when in certain towns it was illegal for men to walk outside without wearing a hat. This rule came from the belief that a hat symbolized respect, dignity, and discipline, and men who appeared bareheaded in public were thought to be careless or disrespectful towards society. Imagine today being fined simply because you forgot your cap at home. Yet back then such laws were enforced with seriousness, and in some areas people could even be taken to court for repeated violations. Women too were not spared from strange restrictions. In some places they were not allowed to wear trousers or any clothing considered masculine, because it was seen as defying the natural order. A woman seen in pants could face humiliation or arrest, which seems unbelievable now when fashion is all about freedom. Equally odd were laws surrounding animals. Since most of American life revolved around farming and transport, animals were central to daily existence, but lawmakers still managed to create bizarre restrictions. One such law forbade giving alcohol to horses. It might sound like a joke, but the reason was that farmers and traders sometimes tried to give their horses liquor to make them run faster or keep them warm in winter. Eventually authorities realized drunk horses caused chaos, running wild on streets and damaging property, so the practice was outlawed. Similarly, in some towns people were prohibited from bringing goats or donkeys onto main roads. Since these animals were common in villages, they often wandered into busy markets causing traffic jams and accidents, so rules were made that if anyone brought such animals into central streets, they could be fined heavily. These laws may sound laughable now, but at that time they reflected the challenges of a society still balancing tradition, religion, agriculture, and the slowly emerging modern world, where lawmakers tried to maintain order by creating rules that, to modern ears, sound absurd but to them seemed necessary for survival and discipline. As we move deeper into the world of old American strange laws, we discover that even the simplest joys of life like food, drink, and laughter were not always free. For instance, there was a time when in some regions eating certain foods at specific times was restricted, the famous example being the ban on ice cream sodas on Sundays. Lawmakers believed that such sweet treats distracted people from church and religious duties, so shopkeepers were not allowed to serve them. Instead, as a clever loophole, many vendors began selling ice cream with syrup poured on top, and from this strange ban the popular American ice cream sundae was actually born, a dessert that still survives today. Equally odd were restrictions on alcohol. Though prohibition is widely remembered from the 1920s, many small towns had even earlier and stranger liquor laws. In some places taverns could not serve beer after sunset, while in others drinking was banned within a mile of a school or church. One state even passed a rule that made it illegal for bartenders to sing while serving customers, claiming it encouraged sinful behavior. Beyond food and drink, some laws targeted human behavior in the most peculiar ways. One small American town had a regulation that required citizens to smile in public. If someone walked the streets with a frown, it was considered an offense against the spirit of the community. Police rarely enforced it strictly, but the law existed as a reminder that cheerfulness was seen as a civic duty. Imagine being forced to smile when you did not want to, and being judged by law for your facial expression. Another strange regulation forbade whistling or singing loudly after dark in certain areas, as it was thought to disturb the peace and even invite evil spirits. In other places, playing games like dice or cards outside of designated areas could bring fines or arrest. What seems to us like ordinary leisure was once treated with suspicion. These bizarre rules tell us how old American society tried to control not just crimes but also everyday pleasures, shaping a world where entertainment, food, and even laughter could be regulated by law, leaving us today with a mix of amusement and disbelief at how seriously such restrictions were once taken. Moving further into the world of America's forgotten and strange laws, we find that animals and nature were also pulled into the net of bizarre restrictions. For example, in some rural towns it was once illegal for chickens to cross the main street, the reason being that wandering poultry caused accidents with horse carriages and later with automobiles. Yet the very idea of a policeman chasing a runaway chicken became a running joke for generations. Equally strange were laws about dogs. In certain states, if a dog barked continuously for more than 15 minutes, the owner could be fined or even arrested, as lawmakers believed it disturbed public peace. In Colorado, an unusual law forbade donkeys from sleeping in bathtubs, which sounds hilarious until one learns the story. In the early 1900s, a local flood carried a donkey still lying in a tub downstream, causing chaos for rescuers, leading to a permanent law against such behavior. Another oddity was that in some regions, frogs were considered almost sacred during certain months, and catching or killing them could result in a hefty fine, while in one Midwestern town it was forbidden to frighten pigeons, as they were thought to symbolize peace. Beyond animals, many small towns had laws regulating nature itself. One place prohibited the falling of leaves onto public property without them being immediately collected, as if citizens could control autumn. Another community made it unlawful for the sun to set without permission during a fair festival, obviously symbolic but written in official records. All these examples show how early lawmakers mixed superstition, practicality, and humor into legal systems, creating a patchwork of rules that seem absurd to us today, but reflected the struggles of communities trying to impose order on both people and animals, leaving behind a legacy of laws that are remembered more for laughter than justice. As we move deeper into the forgotten world of America's strangest laws, human behavior itself became the target of unusual restrictions. One surprising example is the law in Arizona, where it was once illegal to let a donkey sleep in a bathtub, but beyond animals, humans faced even more absurd rules. In some towns it was forbidden to whistle after dark because people believed the sound attracted spirits or disturbed neighbors' sleep. In New York during the late 1800s, a law required people to walk in single file on certain sidewalks to prevent crowding, which made busy streets look like strange parades. In Florida, a law existed that prohibited unmarried women from parachuting on Sundays, while in some places couples could be fined if they kissed for too long in public. Laughter too became suspicious in a few regions where loud laughing in church was punishable, and in Kansas, a law once banned the serving of ice cream with cherry pie, a dessert combination we now consider perfectly normal. Another odd rule stated that it was illegal to carry an ice cream cone in your back pocket, meant to stop people from luring horses away with the smell of treats. Equally bizarre was a rule in Alabama that forbade wearing fake mustaches in church if they caused laughter, reflecting how even humor itself was seen as disruptive. All these laws remind us that communities in old America tried to regulate even the smallest acts of daily life, creating a world where eating, laughing, walking, or even carrying ice cream could turn into a crime. and today these rules stand as amusing windows into the fears, beliefs, and strict moral codes of a society that was still learning how to balance freedom with order. As the collection of strange laws continues, we find that even food and drink in old America were surrounded by odd regulations. For example, in Massachusetts it was once illegal to eat peanuts in church, as lawmakers feared it would cause distraction during sermons. In some southern states, chewing gum in public buildings was banned because it was seen as rude and unhygienic. One town in Illinois made it a crime to drink beer while sitting on a horse, while in another it was forbidden to carry around a soda bottle without a cork. In Nevada, a law stated that it was illegal to lie down on a sidewalk and eat ice cream, while in Kentucky the state once had an official law that required every citizen to take a bath at least once a year, something both funny and shocking by modern standards. Coffee too became a target in certain places, where drinking more than 3 cups a day was considered unhealthy and could result in fines. Equally strange was the idea that in some areas, sharing food with strangers in public parks without permission from authorities was punishable. Perhaps the oddest was a law in Oklahoma that forbade people from making ugly faces at dogs, as officials believed it could provoke bites and lead to accidents. These examples reveal how lawmakers in the past tried to control not only major crimes but also the smallest personal habits, turning everyday acts like eating, drinking, or even making a silly face into matters of legal concern, and today they stand as reminders of how differently societies once viewed order, health, and morality, laws that now sound more like comedy than justice. In old America, there were also laws that directly affected people's happiness and entertainment. You'll be surprised to know that sometimes even dancing, singing, or attending a show was restricted. In some states, there was a time when dancing in public places was considered a crime, so much so that if someone danced even a little at a wedding, the police could come and fine them. Similarly, there were strange restrictions on watching theater and drama. Some places completely banned stage performances on Sundays. Singing and music also came under bizarre rules. For example, in some towns, singing at night was considered noise pollution and strictly prohibited, even if you were just humming at your window for your own happiness. In fact, in certain states, playing instruments like the flute or drums in public was not allowed at all because it was seen as leading people astray. The funny part is that in some areas, laughing too loudly at a comedy show or bursting into big laughter during a funny play was considered indecent and could even result in a fine. The logic behind these laws was that people should spend more time on serious work and religious activities, but the outcome was the opposite. People celebrated secretly, danced in hidden gatherings, and listened to songs in private. These laws gave a strange and fascinating shape to the recreational life of old America, where in the so-called land of freedom, even laughter and joy sometimes hung under the sword of punishment. In the early days of America, work and business were governed by rules that seem both strange and fascinating today. Some towns had laws that limited how many hours a person could work in a day, not for the workers' protection, but to prevent them from over-earning and upsetting the balance of society. In certain states, it was even illegal to open a store or conduct any business on Sundays, a rule that became so strict that people who sold basic necessities like bread or milk could be fined. There were also odd restrictions on who could run a business. In some areas, only men of a particular faith were allowed to own shops, while women were discouraged or outright banned from managing trade. Taxation rules were equally bizarre, with some states charging fees for owning more than a certain number of candles in a shop, or for weighing goods like flour and sugar. In a few towns, merchants had to wear specific badges that proved they were licensed sellers, and without them, even a farmer trying to sell apples by the roadside could be arrested. Child labor was another curious reality. Many factories legally allowed children as young as 7 to work long hours, though some states attempted to pass laws to regulate it, often inconsistently. These business-related laws reflected an America that was still struggling to find its rhythm between growth, morality, and fairness, leading to a society where even the simplest acts of trade could feel like walking through a maze of strange and outdated rules. Family and social life in old America was also shaped by laws that today sound almost unbelievable. Marriage, for example, was not just a personal decision but heavily controlled by the state and church. In some regions, it was illegal for people of different races to marry, and such unions were considered void even if performed in secret. There were laws that required couples to obtain official permission from local leaders before marriage, and without it, their relationship could be deemed unlawful. Divorce was another matter, extremely difficult to get, with some states allowing it only in cases of extreme cruelty or abandonment, meaning many people were trapped in unhappy marriages. Even relationships outside of marriage were harshly judged. Cohabiting without being legally married could lead to public shaming, fines, or even imprisonment. Parenting too came under strange restrictions. Certain states passed laws that demanded strict discipline of children, punishing parents who were considered too lenient. On the other hand, children were expected to obey their parents to such a degree that defiance could legally be treated as a crime. Social gatherings and friendships were also influenced by rules, with some towns banning mixed-gender dances or requiring men and women to sit separately in public meetings. These laws reveal how the private lives of people were constantly monitored, creating a society where love, family bonds, and even friendships had to be lived carefully, always under the shadow of rigid regulations. In the early days of America, justice and punishment were as unusual as the laws themselves, often reflecting the harshness and strict moral codes of the time. Instead of modern prisons, many towns relied on public humiliation to discourage crime. One of the most common punishments was the pillory, where offenders were locked by their head and hands in a wooden frame, forced to stand in the town square as neighbors mocked, jeered, and sometimes threw rotten food at them. Others were placed in stocks, sitting with their feet bound, unable to move for hours or even days. More peculiar still were fines for crimes that today seem trivial, like whistling too loudly, wearing clothing that was considered too fancy, or speaking against the church. In some places, people were branded with hot irons to mark them forever as thieves or criminals. There were also laws requiring those who broke curfew to carry lanterns at night as a sign of guilt, while gossipers could be punished by being forced to wear a scold's bridle, a painful metal device fitted over the head. Even children were not spared. If they disobeyed their parents too often, they could be beaten publicly as a warning to others. Justice was swift, unforgiving, and deeply tied to community shame, with the goal not just to punish but to make an example of the offender. These strange and often brutal methods remind us how different life once was in America, where maintaining order mattered more than compassion, and fear was seen as the surest way to keep society under control.